Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Black-Liberation.Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Renee Jordan, and today this episode is for those who find themselves in classrooms that don't have a lot of structure, but they are heavy on the outcome or like what you're supposed to be able to do once you're done. So if you find yourself in a classroom that doesn't have a whole lot of homework, it's heavy on the tests, heavy on the projects, heavy on the final exam or final project, but it doesn't have a lot of structured homework assignments from one week to the next or from one session to the next session. This episode is for you. So we're going to get started. I'll see how many questions I can get through now, and then we'll come back next week for any of the ones that I have not covered. So these are some questions that you may have. I do want to encourage you to go back to season 1, episode 9 of the Black-Liberation.Tech podcast, where I talk a little bit more about it. I just wanted to make sure that I hit a few questions that could be of concern to you. So let's go ahead and get started. Number 1, if my class doesn't assign homework or give much guidance, how do I know what I'm supposed to be learning on my own? Well, a good place to start is your course syllabus. That is the document that you get at the beginning of the class. It is usually thought of as a tentative, subject to change plan for the semester. And in that syllabus, you're going to have student learning outcomes. So by the end of this course, you should be able to do X, Y, and Z. You'll also see the topics that are covered from one week to the next, as well as a schedule of events. And so if you don't see many like little quizzes or little homework assignments in there, you may want to create your own based on what you're expected to learn by the end of the semester. So I want to encourage you to use AI as a thinking buddy on this. And you can do that by taking those student learning outcomes and uploading them to a generative AI tool and saying, hey, these are the student learning outcomes for this course. Here is the required reading for this course. And here's the topic that's being covered next week. What are some questions that I can ask myself as I read to make sure that I'm understanding the material the way I should? Also, what are some hints that I can use in order to make notes, make diagrams, make flow charts as I read of processes, procedures, policies, things that compare, contrast, if there are structures and functions associated with what I'm learning? What are some things that I can draw that can help me along the way? What are some ways that I can quiz myself? Okay, so those are some things that you can ask a generative AI tool to help you with. You can also make sure that you stay on top of the reading. Chances are, if it has a topic or a weekly schedule of topics or readings that you're supposed to complete, turn those headings, turn those subheadings into questions that you can ask yourself. Look through the reading material. Do they have end of the chapter questions that you can answer as you read or after you're done reading? Does it have unit questions that you can answer so that when you get to the end of the unit, you can have your own practice with those questions? Don't wait on them to be assigned. Some will assign them and not collect them. That's possible. Some will assign them for you to turn in later, which would be helpful so that you can get feedback. And then sometimes when you turn in your homework, you might not get it graded until it's time for the quiz or the test. So it'll be important for you to review those questions and see if you're able to get answers that are in line with what you are supposed to be able to do by the end of the semester. Now, I have had a master's level course where the professor had an assigned textbook, and essentially we needed to read each chapter. He grouped the chapters by week, but he did not address those chapters during the lecture. However, during the lecture, he provided examples of how those different things were demonstrated, how they were implemented, how they framed different areas in terms of law, in terms of policy, in terms of practices. And so what I made sure that I did with that class, please keep in mind, I had this teacher at least 2 or 3 times. So I knew, or I had this professor at least 2 or 3 times. So I knew how his classes flow. He assigned the reading, but he provided examples and expected our presentations to demonstrate the knowledge from the reading as opposed to regurgitate it. So not presenting what was read, but presenting what it looked like in real life, whether that was from researching other articles, case studies, or presenting information based on what we have seen as educators in our various institutions and organizations. And so I knew the test, the midterm and the final, would be based on the reading. Yes, we would have to apply it, but it was more so on being able to identify the information. So I essentially had to read all the way through the text. I highlighted important information. I made notes in the margins. I made sure that I could clearly identify examples of what I've read. So, not a literal, the definition of X is this, that, and the third. No, I needed to know the definition of X so that I could articulate how it appeared in a case study. How did it appear in a certain practice? How did it appear when it's implemented in real life? And so, understanding how the faculty member framed their midterms and their tests helped me. So that you can ask people who had a professor before, hey, how do they structure their midterms? How do they structure their finals? What are the expectations of the course beyond what is provided in the course syllabus? Another good place to look would be the rubric. So the syllabus would be a good place to look. The weekly schedule in terms of what topics are covered, taking a look at the reading and seeing what questions are there, whether it's at the end of the chapter or the end of the unit. If you don't see any questions there, then you need to make your own questions up and take good notes by using the headings and subheadings as a form of outlining your notes, as well as turning those headings and those subheadings into questions so that when you're reading, you're thinking about what you're supposed to know in that portion of the text. And once again, I want to encourage you to use a generative AI tool as a thinking partner and setting it up so that you ask the generative AI tool to generate questions that you can consider while you read based on the student learning outcomes for the course and the different topics that are being covered in your required reading. And those things are things that you can type in. So these are the student learning outcomes. These are the headings for the reading that I'm required to do for this week. What are some questions that I can ask myself as I read so that I can take notes that will help me accomplish the student learning outcomes? So those are some recommendations that I have for you. Next, how do I take charge of my learning without feeling like I'm teaching myself everything alone? Okay. Well, one way to do that is to get into a study group. Find a study group that goes over the material either before a project is due, before a midterm, before the final. Maybe you all meet twice a semester. Maybe you set up a group me. Maybe you set up some kind of WhatsApp, something where you can talk back and forth with each other to check in and see, hey, did you all understand this topic this week? These are the questions I have. Does anyone else have these similar questions? Did you find any resources outside of class or within the course resources that specifically helped you with that material? And then go from there. Perhaps you all can get questions together to ask each other. Perhaps you all can take a look at your drafts before you submit them. I do recommend that if you're working with a study group and you're sharing how you're approaching your work, that it is with people that you have worked with before. You want to make sure that you don't get set up. And you want to make sure that it is an equal give and take relationship. Perhaps it's not a whole group. Perhaps it's one study buddy. But if you all are all working on a project and you're responsible for different topics, then that would be a pretty good case for sharing drafts or sharing your thought processes, even if you're not sending your file over, but talking it through with them to get feedback on your work before you submit it. Also, something else that you might want to consider is, once again, using a generative AI tool as a thinking buddy to find out what are some helpful resources that can help you accomplish the student learning outcomes or the objectives or a task or a project. You can ask it for helpful resources. You can also go to your library and ask your subject matter librarian to help you find resources. Share your syllabus with your librarian and say, hey, I'm in this class. It doesn't have a whole lot of structured homework assignments, and I really want to make sure that I perform well when it comes time to midterms and finals. I don't want to wait until it's time for a test to figure out that I didn't know everything as well as I should have known it. So what can I do? And work with them to create perhaps even your own study guide and get access to open educational resources. So resources that professionals have created for others to use in order to learn a specific subject. So I do recommend working with your librarian on that. Now, what's the difference between being self-directed and being unsupported? And how do I protect myself from burnout? Okay, now unsupported looks like you've gone through all of your resources, you've gone through all of your materials, you've signed up for office hours and showed up, and then you were redirected to the things that you covered already. So you've done everything that you could as an individual to try to work towards learning the material, and then you're redirected to go back to that same material. That's not going to help. You need specific instructions, and you can say, you know what? Thank you for directing me back to my textbook. I have read the textbook. I've gone over the example questions. I looked at the answers to the odd questions and saw that somewhere I was off. Is it possible for you or for you to direct me to a teaching assistant or to a tutor who can help me go over the material to see where I went wrong? And hopefully from that, you'll get the support you need in order to get the reinforcement of learning that you need in order to do better in the class. Now, being self-directed would be the initiative that you take in order to pull all the resources you can, talk to your classmates, go to the teaching assistant, go to the open office hours with the professor. That would be self-directed. Going to YouTube and looking up professors or experts who address the same material and trying to get the information or trying to learn another way. That would be self-directed. Unsupported is if you've done everything that you can, so you've tried the self-directed piece, and then when you show up, you're not met with further assistance. So whether that means the tutor is not tutoring you, they're just telling you to reread the same thing you just read, or you go to the professor and the instructor and they just say, well, it's your responsibility. You have to figure it out. Now, if you're not being supported, I do recommend checking in with your advisor, checking in with your guidance counselor, checking in with someone who can direct you to further assistance. Don't give up if you feel like you're not getting the support that you need from whom you believe you should get the support. But keep trying, reach out to others. There are other people in place that are also outside of the classroom that can help direct you, and perhaps you can get some guidance there. So the difference between being self-directed and unsupported: being self-directed means that you're trying to make a way. You're trying to figure it out. You're trying to do everything you can to make progress in the right direction. Unsupported is after you've done all of those things and you reach out for help to those who are in place to help you. So your professors, your teaching assistants, the tutors, the student learning center, your classmates, and you don't get any further direction or instruction to help you along your way. That's being unsupported. And I would encourage you to find someone who can provide you with additional guidance to get you the help that you need. All right, next question. How do I decide which tutorials, videos, or resources are actually worth my time when there's so much online? Okay, well, let's say you go online and you do a search. See if there are views. See if there are reviews. of the videos. See if there's comments. Take a look at the description of the video and see if it matches up with the student learning outcomes, with the topics, with the types of questions that you're being asked to know, and do a precursory, like do a quick comparison. So before you start the video or the tutorial, see how much of it actually aligns based on what you can preview with what you're responsible for. You can even ask, hey, I'm looking at this resource. So let's pretend it is a YouTube video. You could go to Notebook LM, add the video to your Notebook LM, and say, hey, I'm interested in looking at this video in order to help me study this course. You can provide Notebook LM with a copy of your syllabus. Would this video be an appropriate resource for me to use? And then Notebook LM could do the comparison and give you feedback as far as what parts of the video you might want to watch and whether or not it aligns based upon your syllabus. So that's another way to use a generative AI tool. The reason I say Notebook LM is because it's backed by Google, it's a Google project, and as a result, it's able to look through YouTube video transcripts. And so if you have a 3-hour video or an hour-and-a-half video or a 50-minute video that you want to be able to do a quick comparison with or against your course, then that's one way to get at it. And so I would definitely recommend it. All right, the last question for today. If I'm doing DIY learning, how do I know if I'm doing it right or missing something important? That's a good question. Once again, I'm going to recommend using a generative AI tool as a thinking buddy. And what you can do is you can ask the generative AI tool to take on the role of the professor for X, Y, and Z course. Here are the student learning outcomes for this course. Please create a 10 or 15 question quiz based on this week's topic. Just as a point of reference, here are the required texts for this portion of the course. And so you can give it its title, give the title as well as who it was by. And hopefully that information will be enough for the generative AI tool to pull information from the internet to generate a 10 to 15 question quiz for you. And then see how you do and ask it to grade your responses so that you can get feedback before you actually have to take a test. Now, one thing, this is not a Notebook LM promotion, but you can take it that way. I'm not saying it's the best tool. I'm saying it is a tool. One of the things that you can do is if you type up your notes, you can upload those into Notebook LM. You can have your syllabus uploaded into Notebook LM. And you can also have those YouTube videos uploaded into Notebook LM if perhaps your professor records the lectures on YouTube, or you could find a professor who teaches the same course at another school or at your same school who has YouTube videos. Upload those to Notebook LM. And Notebook LM, you can ask it to generate quizzes for you and it will grade it for you, whether those are multiple choice quizzes, whether those are quizzes where you submit a response and get feedback that way. Another way, let's go back to the study group. Create a study guide for each other. Perhaps each person takes a different section of the course and you create notes that are the important things that everyone should know, in addition to sample questions. Perhaps those sample questions are pulled from the book. Perhaps those questions were pulled from notes that people took during class so that you can revisit and answer them. So from your study group, create a study guide that has the important notes that everyone should know for each section and create student-generated questions. What questions do they have about each section? Whether that means they thought those questions and now they're able to answer them, or perhaps they have these questions and they find themselves having trouble answering them. And once you all have that study guide, perhaps you created a Google Doc where everyone can type at the same time and see the information that's provided. Perhaps everyone fills it out there, or you make a copy of the document so that you can fill it out on your own. And then ask the person who was in charge of a specific section to go over your answers to see if your answers align with what they should be. You can even take that study guide and take it to the tutor, take it to the teaching assistant, take it to your professor during open office hours and ask ahead of time. So before the test, before the quiz, before the midterm, before the final, and say, hey, these are some questions that I answered in our study group. We went over them together. And you know what? I think I got it, but could you please confirm whether or not I have answered the question at the level that you require? Now, another thing you want to do when it comes to requirements and evaluating your responses and what you've done, take a look and see if your professor has provided a rubric. A rubric can help you grade your own work before you turn it in. Look at the criteria. So every requirement of the assignment or project. See what level of proficiency you have reached based upon the descriptions that are in each box. So most of the time it's 1 through 5. You want to head on over to the highest score and see if you tick off all the boxes under that column so that you are aiming for the highest score. You can even ask someone to grade it for you based on the rubric. You could ask the TA or the tutor to evaluate your work based on what your responses are against the rubric. Go during office hours. The professor might not be able to give you a grade just then, but you can ask them if you're missing anything specific, or if you have to make it more general, ask them, is there something that students tend to miss when they submit their work based on the rubric that goes along with the project or the assignment, or based on their experience with the course in prior years or prior semesters. So don't go at it alone. Make sure you reach out to others. Others can include your classmates. Others can include a study group. Others can include a tutor, a teaching assistant, a professor during their open office hours. And if you're not getting the support there, then don't go unsupported. Reach out to guidance counselors, reach out to your advisor, reach out to your librarian. Librarians are very knowledgeable and can provide you with direction as far as where you can go for help. Perhaps the subject matter librarian is familiar with the faculty member, and they can even give you additional resources, open educational resources, resources in the library or in their database that will help you along the way and don't cost a thing. So reach out to those other people who support learning, the Student Learning Center. Go there. Go to the Writing Center. Go and seek help. Do not be satisfied with being unsupported. Find your support, even if that means getting to know people and networking on your own. So once again, thank you for listening to another episode of the Black-Liberation.Tech Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Renee Jordan. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and share, rate, and review the podcast to help it become more discoverable. And until next time, take care. Bye-bye.